Welcome to the Connection Practice podcast, where empathy, insight, and science come together to help you find peace within and harmony in your relationships. Join me for inspiring conversations and a practical skill that brings emotional safety, clarity, compassion, and connection to your life. So today we're joined by Rachel Kim, a global educator, leadership developer, and lifelong community builder. Rachel is an Associate Dean of Student Success and Engagement at Minerva University. In the role, one of her main responsibilities is to lead their coaching and talent development team. And this team supports students through a 4-year journey across multiple global cities, helping them navigate growth, purpose, and belonging. In her work, Rachel focuses on the human side of leadership, empathy, emotional awareness, values, and connection, especially at a time when technology and AI are rapidly reshaping how we live and work. She's currently deepening her own practice of heart-centered leadership through frameworks like the Connection Practice. So she brings a learner's mindset to integrating these tools at work, at home, and in her community. So welcome, Rachel. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Rita Marie. And that little bio really lights my heart because I really am bringing a learner mindset here today. I want to start off by saying I'm not an expert of anything, but I am just curious and I love being in learning with you.
Well, thank you. Rachel is also a board member for the Connection Practice and is just such a valuable resource on our board. So, with that in mind, Rachel, what initially drew you to the Connection Practice, and what about it resonated with you as something you wanted to go into more deeply?
Yeah. Well, let's be honest, it was you, Rita Marie, right? I don't know if I'm sure you remember. It was about 2.5 years ago when you reached out to me out of the blue, telling me about this practice that I didn't even know that I needed at the time. And so, was that the first time I thought about emotions and heart intelligence? No, but I think it was the first time you gave me words to describe something that I felt like I needed more work to do with. And as I reflect on this piece too, I think about my own conscious emotional awareness journey to be in three parts. So first, as an adult, I should say first, it happened when I became a mother. I started feeling things a lot more deeply, right? I didn't have the words to describe it. I just knew I felt something. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't have words for it yet, but I knew it meant something. And actually, it's when I just started to make more conscious choices about how I spent my time away from my child and how I spent my time at work. So I think that was my first instance. Second instance was when I decided to become a coach. So I got trained. My first certification was with is with an organization called the Coactive Training Institute, Coactive Coaches Institute. And that's when I started really uncovering the words of the emotions that I was going through and how important values were to live a more purposeful and meaningful life, and how important self work is to be available for others. And, others meaning family, your colleagues, your friends. And so that was, I think, another time where I was like, aha, right? This is like another. I went through it because I wanted to be a better manager. I wanted to, be more available to people, but I realized that I became more self-aware of how my actions really created different impacts, right? Depending on how I was being in the world. And then, of course, the connection practice is number three. I think not just having emotions, not having just words of values and intentionality. That wasn't all of it. And I think, and I think we've talked about this before. Like many of us, we grow up in a very achievement oriented world, right? And about the importance of being and acting smart and having the right answers and making smart decisions. And it seems to be all about like, what do you think? What do you know? And then this piece with a connection practice, bringing that empathy and insight together, right? Really tapping into our heart intelligence. That's when I was like, oh, yeah, like as a coach, how can I help people be, full human beings right? Bring their full potential. Because that's the point, right? How do we bring that alive with ignoring, right? Without looking at this big, hardworking organ, right? This muscle in our bodies that really could give us so much more intelligence than just, again, the brain's important. Don't
Yeah.
get me wrong, right? It is really important. But I was like, oh, yeah, like, why are we not taught this more, right? Why are we not learning this as like kindergartners, right? You're taught your ABCs and your one, two, threes, right? And yes, and I'm sorry if I'm going too long, but we are taught social emotional learning now, right? That's very prevalent in the school system. But again, I think that's like a lot of words or a lot of like thinking about it and not feeling into it. So this is like the next stage of my emotional awareness journey. And like I said, I'm still learning. I'm learning how to practice it. I would love to practice it more. And being here today, making this commitment to you to be in conversation, I think that's moving me forward. Cross my fingers.
Well, thank you, Rachel, for such a thoughtful answer. Actually, you're so much more self aware of the stages of your emotional growth, you could say, than most people that I talk to. To really see it in those stages is quite amazing. And just to give you a little hope, recently, our director of international teacher training told me that they have a connection practice school now in Idaho called the Peace Valley Charter School, and the eighth graders are teaching the first and second graders. So when you say we should be learning this in kindergarten, we're not quite to kindergarten, but we actually have, the 8th graders teaching the younger kids, which can happen with the connection practice. We can pass it on. Each one can teach one.
Yeah,
So
that's beautiful.
we
Thank you
we
for
have
sharing
hope.
that with me.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. And so, since you are so engaged in really teaching leadership to young people, and you think about it in today's world, especially with the AI that is expanding so rapidly, what human capacities do you think are becoming more essential?
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting time, isn't it, Rita Marie? AI is everywhere. I think a lot more than everyone existed. It is embedded. If it hasn't already been embedded in all of your lives, all of our listeners' lives, it will be soon, I think. And I don't think we can ignore it. I actually think there's great uses for it, great benefits. I actually use it every day.
Yeah.
um, because I do think there are some opportunities to get more information, right? Than we perhaps have had the capacity to do otherwise. So I think there are great things that come with AI. But I do think as leaders, it really provides, I mean, as human beings, let's like all of us are leaders, right? We lead from where we sit. But we have an opportunity to really focus now more on our human intelligence, our hard intelligence, whatever you want to call it, the things that AI is not yet able to do. Who knows in the future? I don't know.
Yeah.
I truly actually believe that there's something really about live beings, not just human
Yeah.
beings, right? But like living animals that you cannot replicate. You can't replicate in an artificial system. But, somebody could prove me wrong, who knows, in 10 years. But this is, again, the time to really focus on what makes us truly human. So it's an opportunity to do that. And what is it? And I think it is about the heart to heart connection. It is about knowing how to be more self aware of your feelings and your needs and your emotions and other people's feelings and needs. A computer can't tell you that, right? And an artificial intelligence can't be in that room with you or even a virtual room that we get from, right? All of our physical cues to what's going on. So I think it's really important to elevate some of those human skills. And empathy, of course, is a huge one of really, again, tapping into our human emotion, understanding what that is trying to tell us about motivations and our desires. And one other thing that I think is like connected to all of this is discernment. Because in the age of AI, there's so much more information than we even need. There's a lot of truth and there's a lot of not truth. And so I think it's really incumbent upon all of us to use other intelligence, right? Again, self-awareness, trust, understanding our own biases and knowing how to look for it in others to really help us filter through all the noise. And I think that the skill of a discernment comes again from empathy. It comes from connecting with people, being in relation, trusting yourself, trusting your gut. And that work is not done solo. It's done by relating with others. I don't know if that made any sense, but I truly believe a leader's job in the future is to really be discerning and then using that to be able to make really good decisions for themselves and for others.
Well, I completely agree with you there. I think, it really does come down to how we make decisions, the choices we make, and
Mhm.
where are those coming from?
Right.
And as you know, we teach in the connection practice that when we are connecting with the empathy and with the insight, the heart intelligence, we do make those better decisions. And you were talking about how important it is, at least right now in our time, we still think it's important to have that authentic heart to heart connection. And as you know, since you've been involved with us, we tried to figure out how to scale and considered AI and ultimately came to the realization, when it comes right down to learning these skills. I mean, some of it could be taught by AI, but the actual learning heart to heart doesn't seem to be replaceable, so that in ultimately our scaling model, we ended up keeping authentic heart-to-heart coaching so that our people that are learning the connection practice are not just working with AI. And it was kind of tempting because it's in many ways easier, much easier to scale with AI than with human beings. But like you've so beautifully said, it doesn't really seem to be replaceable. And I
Mhm.
I feel pretty grateful for that.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I am too. I mean, it's something we can revisit, but I think the other piece of with AI is things are quicker. Right? Like,
Yes.
so I think again, we as a society at this point sometimes overvalue speed, efficiency, productivity. And I think what gets lost then is the struggle in the moment, right? The thoughtfulness that is needed in taking time with something, especially when things are hard. You can't put a band-aid on things that are more deeper rooted. And I think with AI, there is this idea of like quick solutions, quick fixes. How do we resolve that relationship? Tell me what to do, rather than taking the moment to look deep within. So that does take time. And I know, I don't know if you remember this, Rita Marie, when we first started working together and I was in, coach training. Sometimes things will take a really long time and I'll be like, oh my gosh, usually take 30 minutes to do something like this. But like, it takes time to do human work. And it doesn't mean that it's not good. It doesn't mean that it's not productive. It just is different. And I really think that people are craving a little bit of that slowing down, even though they don't know it. Right. I think we are all craving that. And I think that's a beauty in coaching relationships as well. When I work with students, when I work with adults, I think what they value the most is being able to just sit with somebody and just process one thing.
Right.
30 minutes, 45 minutes, however time we give it. Because then they move on and they could, rush for rush for the rest of the day, but at least they gave themselves the gift of that time to be with themselves.
Yeah, I agree. That's so important. Actually, sometimes in the connection practice community, we say we slow down to speed up. Meaning that when we slow down and really listen and get connected, that often life goes a whole lot better. We don't make the same errors, we don't get stuck. When we slow down to listen, that it actually speeds our life up in the best of ways. Or you could say we slow down to speed up the evolution of our own consciousness, that we're more conscious of how we're growing, of how we're responding to life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the consciousness is key, right? Awareness, consciousness, whatever it is that, starts lighting up your life rather than having life happen to you. Because a lot of times we're just going, going, going. We're not thinking about what we're doing or how we're being, which again, I think is really important. But when I went through my first coach training, the line that I remember the most is we're human beings, not human doings. And I love to share that with students. Sometimes they're like, oh my God, that is so fun. But it's true. We always forget how to be and how important
Yeah,
that is.
exactly. All right. So, can you share a moment from your leadership where paying attention to the emotions, the values, and the needs really helped you get clarity?
Yeah, I mean, there are several moments, and let's see, I'll start with one example, let's say. And even with my first phase of my emotional journey, I think that for me, I I think many of us believe that a leader has answers. A leader is quick to answer, right? And a leader, is successful by espousing those either characteristics or skills, right? Being knowing, all the time. And I have definitely learned, especially in the last 10, 15 years, that actually a good leader doesn't have all the answers. And even if they did, they're not the ones to quickly bring that out, right? They really create the space for others to really provide other people's sense of contributing, right? To matter, to belong. And if you are shutting that down because you want to pretend, like act like you are the leader, you're not actually creating that community or the safe space for people to make mistakes and grow. And so I think as a leader, I think it's really been important to know one, I don't have all the answers. Two, I don't have to know all the answers. And three, allow the process, even though it may take longer than right me having all the answers, letting the process play out because I definitely can learn from other people's feedback and questions and mistakes. I learn from mistakes all the time. People don't believe it when I'm like, I make mistakes. Here's an example, or where I tell them I don't know something. And I think it's really important to really be authentic with the people that you're working with and model that behavior for others. So I think my leadership style has shifted from, again, being like this quick answer, achieving person to somebody who really wants to be collaborative, somebody who really wants to open up that space for others. Am I perfect all the time? No. There are still sometimes I'm like, oh, we need this answer faster. So I'll facilitate it happening faster. But I think that I share out loud and I acknowledge what's happening. And I think that's also important to share. This is why I'm sort of taking over at this point. I will respect all of your opinions. Please let me know if there's, other ways I could be, but here's what's happening.
Okay. So I'm hearing that you have learned to make yourself more vulnerable in a lot of
Oh, yeah.
ways.
Oh, yeah. It's still something I'm working on, but yes,
Mhm.
both at home, both at work, and actually in all aspects of my life. I try to teach my students how important that is to connect with people. And so I try to model that for myself, no matter how painful that is to let people know I don't know. And I actually think I get the most respect from students when I actually tell them I don't know something. They're like, "What? Really? You're not going to tell me what to do? You don't know, and you're admitting that?"
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's a really like big fresher breath of fresh
Yeah.
air for them to hear that all adults are not perfect just because they are, leaders at a university or teachers, professors, whatever title they may have. We're all human beings.
Yeah. You're modeling that life is all about being open and still learning, you know,
Right.
which is a beautiful thing to model to young people. And also, in your description, Rachel, what I heard you talking about in your leadership style, that you become more vulnerable and also recognize when you need to step up and take charge. And it's kind of like a nice balance of the feminine and the masculine energies that, you can step back and be receptive and you can also move forward. So you're fluid, is what I'm hearing you say, that you're developing that balance when perhaps it used to be a little more of that sort of masculine, let's get it done kind of energy, which we need. I used to be almost all that way. Really. I was very achievement oriented, grew up in the United States, get the job done. My parents were that way. And so when I came to Costa Rica, actually, it's the culture of this country that helped me to get more in touch with being vulnerable, best, and, being just receptive to other people's ideas. Really, the country of Costa Rica, or the culture, taught me so much about connection, about putting connection first and outcome second. So it's not that we don't get around to outcome, but and that's kind of what I hear you saying. You're putting connection first these days. You're listening to other people. And then at some point when it's time for an outcome, that sometimes you need to push something forward. Does that sound right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that being within different cultures, being with different people, and I think this is why it's not solo work, right? You can't improve without relating with others and learning about differences. That's where you grow. That's where you're challenged. That's the opportunity. So yeah, I think every time I meet somebody new, I work with somebody whose style is totally different, right? Or they're from a totally different culture. That's the opportunity where I can really look at what's going on, right? And not make any assumptions about what's wrong or right, but be curious about what is it they're doing? What is it that I'm feeling? What is it that they need? How do we work together around this? And that's when we're able to create again, it's that sense of community and
You're
belonging.
not just charging forward with your way. Yeah, that you're really being inclusive.
Hmm.
And
Trying,
building trying, yeah. Not
trying.
always easy, which brings
No.
me to my next question. How do you approach difficult conversations or misunderstandings, and especially in our digital world, where it's so easy to have miscommunication? Just the other day, somebody sent me an email, and on first reading, I thought, "What?" And then I had to check myself and they have a different intention than I realized. Now I think that was true. I'm so glad I didn't go with my first response. So how is that for you?
Well, yes, I think we all get trapped in that reactive moment when something that you read or hear or see doesn't sit right in some way, right? And you're feeling some way about it. I think I've always been an advocate of live conversations, actually. And I know sometimes it may not be possible. Like maybe you do need to continue over messages or texts or emails. But when I sense tension, my always first instinct is let's get on the phone or let's get on a video call because so much can be lost over just words. As you said, tone, right? Misinterpreted, right? It may not be your intention, but you can't always control how people are receiving. So it's in live conversations where you can catch that. You can catch it in the expression of the other person or the words that they're using, but their body language. And even on the phone, right? You could tell by the tone how people are doing even without looking at each other. And, I do think I highly advocate and I advise students to do this when they're having difficult moments with somebody else, a peer, a roommate, a friend, a professor or whatnot, or employer, and say, you know what, can you get on the phone? Because you don't want to have a back and forth over email. It may get worse rather than better. And the other thing that I have always done is to script it out a little bit. Right? How do I want this conversation to go? What's important to me to express? What do I think is important for them to hear? What are they coming into the conversation with as well? I thought about like what's a win for them. And again, I think this is an area where the connection practice has brought it to another level, right? So I'm not just thinking about the words that I'm saying, but the feelings that I want to convey, the feelings I want them to have. It reminds me of the Maya Angelou quote. I don't know if you're familiar with it. People may not remember what you did or what you said, but they're going to remember how you made them feel. And I was
Yes,
like, oh,
love
yeah,
that.
that's how like, I want every interaction that I have with somebody, whether it was challenging or, uplifting, I want them to leave like, "You know what? We may not have disagreed, but I really respected how we had that conversation. I would be open to having another conversation and moving it forward." Um, and that's what I think we should focus more on, not just the words, but the feelings. So again, just another area where we can practice the connection practice in another way.
Yeah. And also it brings us back to what we talked about earlier about nothing replaces authentic heart-to-heart connection. If you can imagine, having some kind of tension with another person and trying to work it out with AI, there's just no replacement for that. And your intention, Rachel, to get to that conversation live to the phone where you can or Zoom, where you can actually at least hear someone, I think is such a beautiful intention that the moment that there is some possibility of a disconnect.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'd like to see us all practice that habit,
Right, right,
around the
right.
world because, yeah, because there's so much misunderstanding, so much disconnection, and oftentimes people don't, seize it and say, "Oh, I don't want that, so I'm gonna get on the phone. I'm gonna get
Mhm,
on Zoom," and
mhm.
just immediately take care of that. It kinda reminds me of one of the women in my connection circle. Um, she never wanted to let anything go very long. And so in our circle, she said, we always get together and we just clean house. Uh, and when she talked about that, it's like we get straight inside and then we can go to that person that we're upset with. We can resolve it. We're not going to let it just sit another week. And I just think that's so important in being present. All these books about being in the now and being present, not focused on the past or too much in the future. But how can we live in the now when we've got this baggage that we're carrying? Oh, I had that conflict and I just kind of buried it. I didn't get along with this person and I just kind of let it slide. That builds up until we start feeling, oh, life is kind of heavy.
Yeah,
And we
yeah,
can't live in the present because we're just loaded down with moments that we could have turned into moments of even greater connection. I don't know about you, but the
yeah, that's
moment
right.
that you have tension, you can allow that to either separate you or really deepen the connection because you have taken the time and the care and made the phone call and got on
Mhm.
Zoom to show, oh, it matters to me that I keep connection with you. Anyway, just
Yeah,
really appreciate what you said about that because I find it to be so, so important. It's not something that's just oh, it's a nice thing to do, if you start to have a misunderstanding, to take the time to fix it. I don't find that to
right.
be a small thing in life. I find that to be actually a huge thing to get on that right away and not allow more and more separation until there's a complete disconnect and then it gets buried in the two of you, where
Yeah.
it's and weighing you down.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the hardest skills to develop and hardest things to practice, and one thing that I've been thinking about for our students at Minerva is to try to build it in earlier for just everyday, like, smaller potential, like, minor disagreements, right? Because I think in the moment when it's really stressful and difficult, it's really hard to step away and practice those skills. But if you've already practiced it earlier on and use those as opportunities to develop a relationship, right? That's the other piece is that if you don't already have a relationship, the trust isn't there, right? Or at least the budding of a trust. And if you're ever in a conflict with somebody who you really haven't built that relationship with, it's harder to have these
Yeah.
conversations. It's harder to repair. So it's the one thing that I've been thinking about a lot for our university and for young people is how do we teach them to practice these critical skills in non-critical times.
Yeah.
And again, it's not something I think you could practice with a chat box. It's
Right.
just not human.
It's not. You're not gonna have the same kind of life situations. That's very hard to replicate.
Yeah.
Actually, that's one thing that keeps the connection practice from becoming boring because we're constantly running into different life situations with different people in life. And even though our process is always the same, it never gets boring because we always have new content. There's always something there to work out that's going to be a little different than it was before. I mean, we develop a basic skill so it goes smoother, with just more efficiency and more connection, but still, the variety of situations in life is endless. And so
Yeah.
preparing for them in advance, yeah, I'm so glad you're teaching young people that. Rachel, it makes my heart sing. I love to hear about it, really. So, I've heard some things recently that people have been saying about empathy
Mm,
that kind of concern me.
mm.
And I wonder if maybe you've heard any of some sort of negative things about empathy. And I'm wondering what you think that people can misunderstand about empathy in leadership, in relationships, in life, in families.
Yeah, I'm curious what you're hearing. and whether it's the same as well. Well, first, I'll say empathy has made a lot of progress because I think we are talking about it. And I think we are talking about the importance of empathetic leaders, right? And how important it is to use these skills. And empathy, I think, is a skill. It's not something I think you're just born with.
Right.
And I think you could practice it and get better. I mean, which is why the connection practice exists, right? Because it increases our capacity to be empathetic leaders. I think the negativity that I hear a lot is, when you provide empathy, that means you are agreeing or giving permission for everybody to, do whatever it is that they want because you're understanding that, right? Or it may feel like a weakness for leaders. Oh, you're too empathetic, you're too soft on people. And I think that is looking at it from the wrong way. I think a good leader uses empathy. And what we've just been talking about is to really help themselves and whoever they're working with get to a better understanding about what's happening, right? Like real understanding behind the behaviors, the motivators. And then using that as an opportunity to say, okay, well, we know what's happened and we know why, right? What can we do moving forward? How do we both take accountability and responsibility in taking action? So it's just more data, right? To help you connect better with people. And it isn't saying, oh yeah, I totally like, I'll give an example to students. Students are telling us all the time, you don't understand us because, you're giving us these policies that are so unfair. And we'll say, well, we hear you, right? We know that you're stressed. We know that you have a lot of different things going on and you're trying to manage all of this. We understand. It's hard to be young at this time. You have a lot of stressors. And at the same time, we're providing, right, structure and opportunities for you to grow and develop. And, like we try to give them answers to help them empathize with us and why we're setting certain rules and boundaries. And through that, sometimes there's like better moving forward. There's understanding. I do say a lot of times when students hear the reasoning behind the policies and expectations, they mostly understand. And to be honest, all they really need to in those moments is to be heard.
Uh-huh.
They just really want to say, "Hey, do you see us? We're having a hard time." But it doesn't mean that we bring our standards lower. We say we hear you. What else can we provide you with without sacrificing the quality and the standards that we have for everybody to succeed together? What were you getting at, Rita
Yeah,
Marie?
no,
Is
no,
that similar?
well, I've heard, yeah, some people say that empathy makes people too soft,
Right,
or,
right.
that kids have to be strong and they've got to be, excel and, be the best, and empathy's not going to serve them in that way. So I've heard some things like that,
Yeah.
which concerns me. At the same time, just like you in your role there, you have to have some standards, and and you hear the young people. It's a both and. It's not an either or. That we have no structure. We're just going to, listen and be empathetic and do whatever somebody wants. Empathy is not about being nice. It's really about authentic connection. As a matter of fact, when I took a nonviolent communication course with Marshall Rosenberg, I heard him say, the last thing that we need is more nice people. And here he's a master of empathy. And he's saying it's not about being nice. It's about being authentic and, holding to standards too. In other words, you're connecting, but you also have values that are important and things that you're trying to offer. And actually, one of my greatest lessons in the last year came from a situation where I had difficulty with my boundaries. And what came through in that lesson is that soft hearts need firm boundaries. So we teach that as well. In other words, we teach both empathy and honesty. We don't teach people to just be nice and just let other people walk over them. No, not at all. We teach that balance between empathy and honesty, between soft hearts and firm boundaries. It's a both and always. It's not an either or.
I absolutely agree. I think also empathy, allowing others to really truly understand your motivation gets to awareness for them, right? So it's not just about you, it's about them. And it allows, yeah, those those of us who do need to be held accountable sometimes to recognize that, right? What is our role in what's happening, right? Where a lot of times, and again, I'm not saying this happens to especially our students, in case you're listening. It's not that, I think there is a sense of like, this is happening to me and I don't know what to do about it. But if you provide them with empathy, then it allows them to become a little bit more creative in what they can do and recognizing, okay, what are the parts of my behavior or my action that I may want to look at.
Yeah, so you're pointing him back toward self-awareness, really.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that kind of leads me to my next question. I heard you say, I think, that being a young person in the world isn't easy right now. And so I'm wondering, since you talk to young people all the time about what's happening in our world, what do you think that they are feeling and needing?
Oh, so much. So much. And don't get me wrong, they're amazing individuals. Our young people are amazing. They have a lot of capacity to give, right, to others. And at the same time, I know that they're struggling. And there have been both national and global studies about stress of young people. There there are a lot more of them feeling stress. They're feeling it at higher levels. They're feeling it more often. And it's not just about their social life, it's academic, social, professional, existential, right? If you think about climate change and all, what's this all about? So there's a lot of complex, complicated anxieties that our young people are having that I think I really will say hasn't existed in the environment or in the world until this generation, right? Think about all the global conflicts that are also continue to exist. Think about the gun violence that we're experiencing in every corner of the world. And so there is a lot of stress for this group. And I think it's important for us adults to help them recognize, and I hate to use this word normalize, right? We don't want to normalize the craziness, but we want to normalize their experience, right? To say, hey, but you're feeling, right? First of all, are you feeling this and that, right? Or tell us about your feelings, right? Really helping them understand what's in their control. Well, I can name my emotions. What's underneath that? Well, okay, then what is it that you need, right? And from the needs, then we can go into solutions, right? Like, okay, well, then how can we address those needs? We don't have solutions for everything. You know that, Rita.
Yeah. Oh, that's
But it's really important for us as coaches, and I know you believe this too, but the connection practice, it's really important for them to understand what they actually do have control over. And there's a lot that they still have control over, even though the world is chaotic. And just really making that tangible and making it specific, the small things that they could do to still help them do the things that are important to them to be the way they want to be, right? With their peers, within their community, I think is really important to help them recognize and help them actualize. But it's a
yeah.
tough time. I'm sure you agree. I'm so glad I'm not grown up right now. Right, I have more wisdom. I've gone through some things and I have more tools. And so I think that's why it's important to teach them some of these really, really critical lifelong skills.
Exactly. Yeah, I hear you helping them look to areas where they can be powerful in
Mm,
a positive way, to be empowered in a positive way, meeting their needs in ways that really will help them to know they matter. They really do matter. So, and giving them the tools that will keep them on that path.
mhm.
Is that
Yeah.
right?
I have your voice a lot in my time in my day when I work with people or even for myself, right? The constant am I safe? Do I matter? I
Uh,
remember am I safe? Do I matter? Am I safe? And I think about young people these days and that, whether they recognize it or not, because some of it is subconscious, right?
of course.
Until you help them bring it out and voice them. I'm sure. I mean, we're dealing with that every day too, right? So as
Yeah.
adults, we're still struggling with it. Can you imagine as young people when you don't even have the words to share what's going on internally? I think that's really hard, the hardest.
Yeah, I agree that it's really a challenge to feel safe in our time. And as you know, in the connection practice, we really emphasize emotional safety, that we're continually creating our courses, creating our relationships, creating our global community in a way that is emotionally safe because we know how people are so desperate for it,
Hmm.
really.
Yeah.
And so to find a place that where they feel emotionally safe is really important, and I'm sure that in Minerva University that you're striving for that, helping
Yeah.
your students not only feel physically safe, as they travel from country to country, but also emotionally safe.
Right, right, and not to bring it, everybody down about the stress that all those young people are feeling, and again, I think that's why it's the importance of this work. These young people are so talented, and they're so when they have hope, they're so motivated to help, right? Solve all these global problems that many of them did not create, let's be honest, right?
Right?
And so that's what inspires me, that's what keeps me going, that's what makes me just want to do more with this group. And again, not to stress them out, but also like, what can we do? What can we do as adults to support them be their very best and not add any more stressors to their lives? And I think I'm really excited because, as I might have told you, I think, especially Minervans, but I know a lot of young people outside of Minerva are really hungry to do something and to be healthy to achieve that in all ways. So
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
hopeful.
Yeah. Yeah, I am too, and like you, I just love the passion of young people. It helps us to keep our passion alive too, to
Mhm.
remember what it's like to have high hopes and to really be passionate and go after it. So, it is energizing to be with young people.
Energizing.
Yeah.
Energizing. And again, so important to teach them the concepts and skills of discernment because the passion going the wrong way,
Right.
right? And so it's a very, very critical time to be supporting all people become a little bit more self-aware and learn the really important skills of just being human.
Yeah. I agree, and I remember in my own life that my college years and right after college were some of the more challenging years of my life, trying to figure out, how do I make a difference or how do I just, make a life? There's just so much that's in transition there. It is a very challenging time of life. At least that was true for me.
Yeah, it definitely is. And what I see year to year, again, what's really special about this age group, right, is a lot of them have just come from their home community, their home environments, where a lot of what they did was because of all the different people around them, right? So it wasn't necessarily they're from their own motivation, from their own values, from their own needs. But when they step out of that, they're now able to really be exploring what does this mean for me, right? Who am I? And how do I know? And again, there's no answer yet. And I keep telling them, just because you're at Minerva doesn't mean you're going to figure out in these 4 years either. You're going to keep learning about it, but at least we can teach you how to start separating yourself from
Mhm.
again, not forcing you to. If you love all those things, then you can continue to do that. But we're doing it more intentionally of figuring out who your identity, again, the awareness of your values, where they come from, what you want to hold on to, what you want to change. It's such an exciting time for them. And it's a challenging time because then they're like, what if I don't get it right? Oh, that's another thing. They're so afraid of making mistakes. And they're so afraid because everything's in the public forum, right? Their
Yeah.
social media, they don't want to get canceled. So that I think is another challenge that we have ahead of us because we keep saying, "Oh, growth happens when you make mistakes. Failures are, XYZ." But it's so public for them.
Yeah.
And I just think, again, what can we do other than modeling again is another good example, but there's some heightened fear around
Yeah.
making mistakes, saying the wrong things, being with the wrong people. So it's a
Yeah.
concern for sure.
Yeah. 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 Fear of being shamed. I mean,
Not belonging, fear of
yeah,
not.
not belonging, right, of not belonging. Yeah, yeah. I don't know, it's probably been 10 years ago that, uh, I said, I really admire anybody in our world today who is willing to run for office of any kind, because you are so vulnerable. You are got everybody picking your life apart in these times, which was not the case. I mean, you know, like elections were always competitive, but still the degree of just slander and all that can happen. And if you make the slightest mistake and you run for public office, you'll get slammed. And of course, young people have seen that. Like I said, I said this 10 years ago, like, gosh, you have to be super brave to run for public office because you're going to, really get ridiculed and everything. So when our young people see that happening to people that in the past got respect, that just in general human beings had civility,
Mhm.
each other, civility, respect. And when they realize that's not the world we live in today, it's scary. It is
It is
scary.
scary. It is
Yeah,
scary, and again, with AI, AI can make things up that's not even true about you. So
right.
again, whether you put yourself out there or not, something could put it out there on your behalf and you wouldn't even know it. And so, but what I find really interesting about that piece, Frida Marie, is that in some ways, the younger people, because they know that exists, are more discerning of some of the things that's out there. So I'm really hoping that's the bright light in this, that they are growing up with it, they
Yeah.
understand its limitations, and they're losing already some of that trust in what's in the in the cyber I don't even know the language for it,
Like,
in the internet, right? In the cloud, right? And I'm hoping that really encourages them to be more in person with people,
mhm.
right? And getting
Yeah,
to and creating real relationships versus just whatever they might with a character online.
right, exactly. They can build trust in person and
Mhm.
know it's real. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, with all the experience that you have, Rachel, are you able to share an example where perhaps you used your skills to help a student shift after they were in emotional turmoil, help a student really get to this feeling of being safe and mattering that we're talking about?
Yeah, and I'll try to generalize so nobody knows it's them. Well, the good news is, or maybe it's not good news, there are, a couple of students that come to mind where I've been working with students and, as a coach, I see one side of them, right? I'm not in their classroom with them. I'm not in their professional working environment. And sometimes I only see one side, whatever that they will share with me. And of course, I always think the best of my students. And so I'll hear their concerns, I'll hear their struggles, but once in a while, I'll hear something that makes me wonder, right? About, whether they're being misunderstood or something's happening with their relationships. So I'll provide, one example where a student had shared, that they've been doing really great generally professionally. They're, achieving great things, but what they're realizing is that they're having a hard time relating with others because they've done so much more than others, right? So they're sort of, I've done this, I can't relate to them, they can't relate to me, my professors can't relate to me either. Nobody's, I don't feel that sense of connection. And so I was like, time to name some feelings here, right? And some needs. And so I use the connection practice with the student, at least the feelings and the needs version and a little
Mhm.
bit of the heart coherence. And yeah, we identified that he was feeling lonely. He was right. He needed connection. He was feeling like sad, right? So like a lot of like he was like positive. They were really positive in the beginning about look at all that I've done. But actually, I was feeling insecure, I was feeling lonely, I was sad. And of course, then the need is more connections, needing to be understood, right? Being seen for who they were. So many of these universal needs that pop up. And really, when I say this is not just one student, this is sort of a, you know, amalgam of
Yeah.
multiple students in here. But once they are able to name those things, then they can sense, wait, what about this am I causing as well? Because, and as you said it, we were also taught coaches aren't nice. We are also like brutally honest on behalf of our clients.
Mhm.
And so I said, hey, can I challenge you on something here? And they were really open to hearing it. What role have you played in creating this type of environment? Or how, could we
True.
reflect on this? Because I don't know, I'm not in these conversations with you. And they were able to be really honest to say, oh, when I think about it, I have been really bringing in negative energy. I was not, not looking at things from their perspectives. And when we talk about belonging to Rita Marie, and I don't know what you think about belonging, but I I truly believe belonging is something we also create together. It's not something that is there for you and you either, can tap in or tap out. But I do think that we have to be active participants. And so we talked about that, how are you feeling in terms of your own action and wanting to feel belonging and wanting to create this environment. And they were really, again, reflective and honest and said, I think I have a role to play and I would like to ABC.
Oh, uh-huh.
Oh, right. In my most recent conversations, they totally, I wouldn't say 100% turned things around, but was really happy to share that they've made a lot of progress in connecting with certain people that they were really reluctant to, and being vulnerable. That's the other thing too, right? Being vulnerable and sharing. I don't feel like I'm fitting in. What do you think? Could you give me some feedback? I encouraged the student to get feedback as well, and they did. And I think it just feels much lighter in these conversations with the student because they were able to name what was happening, their feelings, their needs, and then see what role they could play, what they had control over, and create and actually do the things they said that they would do to move forward. So I hope it's okay generalizing that way and didn't give too many
Yeah.
specifics,
Oh,
but
no, of course, you need to keep confidentiality. And, I have to say, Rachel, when you were describing that and how, this person came to like 1, 2, 3 things they could do that you lit up. So, that just speaks to me of the rewards that we get from helping people in that particular way, helping people sort out their inner lives so that they can move forward. Because, when we're in turmoil, as you know, I do this a lot, head spinning, emotions churning, that we just get stuck or lost or start making decisions that don't serve us. And when we can help somebody move from this to this and move forward, wow, isn't it the best? You
yeah,
know?
it is. And I think it's, coaching at the core is sometimes very self-serving because when your students, your clients tell you how the session has impacted their lives or, this one thing that they've been working on, it just feels good. It really does, doesn't it?
It really does. And you work with a whole team of coaches, isn't that right?
I do. Yeah. Yeah. I have a team of 5 other coaches on the team at Minerva.
Okay. And I'm curious whether they have some of this same approach that you use?
Yes. At the very core, I had them go through the fundamentals of coactive coach training, which is the place that I went certified at, is the coaching school that I was certified at. And part of that, and I think it dovetails really nicely with the connection practice, is at the core, really believing that our students, our clients are whole human beings. They're naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. And our job is to ask questions to help uncover what 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 our students want from their lives versus telling them what to do. So a lot of it is just being curious. The other part of our work, because we are still working with young people at Minerva, we do put on our advising hat a lot and mentoring hat. So we support them in trying to figure out, right? We do tell them, hey, this is a way you can do something, or that's a way you can explore that career. So there is some of that direct advising that's a little less coaching. But I will say most of our work is truly trying to help our students become more aware of who they are, what they want to do, who they want to be, or who they're becoming along this journey and how they want to be. They all want to become leaders. Well, what does that mean, right? And what kind of leader do you want to be? How do you want to be remembered? And what's important to you? Especially in this age of too much information and speed and urgency being seemingly so important, our job is really to help slow them down to say, okay, you've got this semester, what's most important to you, for short-term and long-term goals, like really helping to bring that back. And then just reminding them of the things that they value, like putting a mirror in front of them, be like, oh, you said you value this, but I don't see that action. Where did that go? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's a lot of what we do, and I do think that when I hire these coaches, I look for willingness to flex, willingness to learn, willingness to be open and be curious, and I think that's what's really important, and then the desire to want to be with students and to
Right.
listen and to empathize.
Wow, I wish I had you as my coach when I was that age, because
Oh, thanks.
it takes us a while to really ever get there. I mean, in our generation, we certainly didn't have anything like that.
No,
It wasn't even a concept. And of course, Minerva is innovative and doing things that not all universities do as
right,
well.
right.
And so, anyway, it just sounds so absolutely wonderful to have that kind of support. I'm curious, do you ever work with parents? Do they play a role in looking at the values and so on? Or tell me about that, how you interact with parents with our younger generation.
Well, parents at Minerva, not so much. I mean, they do come sometimes to prospective student sessions where I will share our methodology and what we do. And I don't mean to generalize parents, but mostly a lot of parents mostly care about is what jobs will they be doing after? What are the career outcomes of your students, right? And I know, right? I mean, going to college, sending your students to university is a very big investment. So, of course, those are
Sure.
important questions to ask. And when I have more time with them, I do introduce them to the concept of values. I ask them questions about their core values. When the last time somebody asked them about their values? And I do think, not surprisingly, some of our students who are really thoughtful about coming to university have thoughtful parents who are also thinking about it. And they love that we're thinking about that. They love that we're working with our students on that because, as you said, a lot of us are doing that work in our 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Right.
And we wonder what could have been if we did it earlier, right? If we could have started leading with more intention, leading with more meaning. And so I do think that some parents really resonate, but I haven't actually done the values work with them. With parents, though, I mean, my whole community of peers are parents. So we talk about this stuff all the time. And I have introduced to, many of my friends the ideas of and the practice of the connection practice and really encourage them to use the feelings and the needs of their children, especially when they're struggling with something. Are they all practicing it? No. But but am I every day? No.
Yeah.
No, but I will tell you, you'd be very happy to hear I did use it with my son the other day when it was
Great.
so funny because that morning we had just and hopefully my son's not listening to this, but if you are, hi, then uh, he and I just that morning were talking about school and I was like, "Oh yeah, there were some days I didn't want to go because maybe I was having an issue with a friend." And he was like, "No, I'd never have those kind of challenges." Well, that evening, something had come up, and again, I'm not getting into details, but something came up, and I could tell he was really feeling it. His face, he has a tell that again, I won't tell you, but he has a tell. And I said, "Hey, there's something going on. I really would love to talk to you about it and help you to talk through these emotions." And he's like, "I don't know, mom. I don't know what I'm feeling." Well, I said, "Well, well, I have a board for you." So I took out the board and we played together with it and we played, right? It's not
Yeah.
necessarily, we played together with it and he really enjoyed it. And he was able to name some more feelings that, he was curious about. I tried to help name some feelings. He told me was wrong, but that's okay, right? I'm just like, oh, I might feel this way. And he's like, no, that's not me. Oh, good. Okay. At least you can say yes or no. And I really do think it helped him just like feel a little bit more expansive around the situation, get more context. We didn't do the empathy, we just didn't have the time to the other side of what was going on, but I think he got what he needed at the time and he's like, "Gosh, that was fun." So, we'll probably do it again.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm sure that is just, creating a level of connection with your son that is not always easy to achieve, and it's something as as kids grow up, it's easy to lose connection. And so hopefully this kind of exchange, like you said, even if you don't guess his feelings right, or, sometimes when we're growing up to a feeling, you know,
Mhm.
but at least, he really understood that he was safe with you and he mattered to you. And
Mhm.
you can get that message across, then you can have that emotionally safe relationship that often lasts. I know that so often in our world today, I've just been hearing more and more how kids are cutting off relationships with parents. I don't know if you've heard about this in the news recently, but being able to have lasting friendships, lasting relationships, healthy relationships with our family members, it's a skill. And then when we actually have it in our lives, it's such a gift. Right
Mhm.
now, My lasting friendships, many of them are lasting because I've used the connection practice. Where maybe in a friendship we had an issue or something and we could have just gone our separate ways. But I used the connection practice and the connection deepened and we've ended up with a, 20, 25, 30-year friendship. And so those are such treasures in my life. And I know that parents with their kids, what is more important than to really keep that bond strong as they grow, even though obviously they need more independence as they grow. It's not a bond of holding them too tight, but to have that emotionally safe relationship with your kids that you build over time and can trust and is going to last. To me, it's one of the outcomes, I guess, of the connection practice that we don't talk about very often, but that I found in
Mhm.
my own life is a tremendous treasure.
This with kids more than adults too. I think kids are more ready to open up than they realize. And so when you're I realized when I was doing it with Ethan, he was sharing me other things about just middle school social life and, what's normal or not normal. So I found that really interesting is that you're focusing on this one instant, but you're able to get different information about other areas that I think is really important to know, some more context that you weren't even knowing that that existed. And I do think that there are so many opportunities to have conversations with our children. And I know that there are a lot of books coming out around it, especially boys. How to talk to boys is really important. And yeah, I think it's really critical for me to hopefully leave my both my children, but especially my son, the skill of naming his emotions, right? Because as you said earlier too, a lot of boys are taught, to man up and that's, don't feel those are not the right feelings. You should feel this way. And so I'm really trying to go against that. And, I actually, instead of bringing, because sometimes I feel like I don't want to put it in their faces. So I don't want to bring the board out with them. I try to do it in other ways, but I was like, oh, this actually really worked today. So that just tells you, Rita Marie, I just need more practice using the boards because it really can be a good tool for students, for kids.
Yeah. Well, I understand like a hesitancy because you know that if kids feel like something's being forced on them, they're going to push back. And so I have found that just leaving the boards out on the table or just having them hang them up on the wall or someplace so they're kind of present but not forced, because when I look at my experience of introducing it to so many people over the last now that when you put it in front of people, there's something tempting. They want to get their hands on those magnets and move those things around, so it's inviting, I guess is what I'm saying, as long as
Mm-hmm.
we don't force it, as
Right.
long as we make it an invitation.
Yes. But you got to also know your audience. With my daughter, she'll think that I'm forcing it upon her. So that's just
Yeah.
another.
Well, that's the thing. You got to know the kids, and their personalities and what works and what doesn't work.
Yep.
So, speaking about that, you've worked not only as a mother, obviously, and in your role there at Minerva, cultures and global communities. So, what have those experiences taught you most, Rachel, about the kind of thing that we're talking about here, about creating connection across the world, really?
Hmm. Well, I think you know the answer. It's universal. The need is universal. And the especially the sense of wanting to matter and belong. It may show up differently. How they express the needs may show up differently, but it is always there. So whether I'm working with a colleague in Tokyo or a colleague in Buenos Aires, I do think that we are all looking for ways to connect as human beings. And whether you do it in an open forum, which you usually don't want to do, but there's really nothing like those one-on-one conversations that really can help create that sense of connection, the sense of beginning of trust and community. Um, yeah, a lot of this work is global and it really resonates.
And as you know, we have the digital connection practice boards now, and that makes it possible for us to scale the connection practice in any language and so that people can do it at any time, because we've got the challenge of the time zones and all that.
Right.
And so I'm curious, just like with your son, you were using a magnetic board. Is that right?
Right. Right.
Yeah, you were using your magnetic board. So I love the magnetic boards, but I'm also more and more finding there's a lot of ease in the digital boards. What do you think about the possibility of being able to scale globally with those digital boards? Can you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a huge opportunity there to use a tool that can work no matter where you're located. And again, I think the beauty of it is we learn how to do it with seeing the actual human beings there as well, right? It's not just a board there and you're moving things and it looks really mechanical. So I think that again, that human aspect is still there. What I also love, and I forget, I think you and I talked about this too, is that there are also feelings all around the world that may not exist in English. And so I think that's would be an interesting opportunity. When we do the values exercise with our students, we even say to them, hey, these are words in the English language, but they're if there are values that resonate with you in your country, from your culture, bring those alive. And so I think that's the opportunity there is how do we then take that further? I did say needs are universal, but again, some words are not. And so it would be some feelings, I would say, right? I think you might know the study that says how language can shape certain emotions and how certain emotions don't exist in certain cultures, or at least they don't think it exists because they don't have the words for it. Which again, it's like all circular, right? So I think that's the opportunity there is how do we then authentically connect with somebody from a different community, different culture, and that you're not just using your own language to do that. So, one, yes, I think there's a huge opportunity to increase everybody's skills of the connection practice through the digital boards. Two, and there's a further opportunity to allow everybody to feel inclusive, right? Included in this practice with the ability to do that. And I know when I was working with Yasid on the global community, we were talking a lot about translation and adaptation. So I'd be curious where it can go next.
I'm curious too. It's a step-by-step process that we're using with our global community. But I'm hoping that in 2026 that we can have representatives from many more cultures interacting in our global community. And just recently we figured out this next step of when someone, for example, puts something in Japanese into our global community, that there will be a way for it to automatically be translated into English so that we can continually overcome any language barrier. When people
Right.
have a place, a global community where they can come together and know it's emotionally safe, and that, the way that we all have a common framework to practice and to just interact with, it's quite a human experiment, I guess, is
Hmm.
what I'm getting at. It's really a human experiment to see just how that's gonna flow. If people will make the effort, for example, if somebody has put something in Japanese and then it gets translated to English, will other people who speak English make the effort, to connect and to get across the cultures? Because it does take extra energy, you know? Uh, it takes extra effort and intention to create truly global community. It's really something to be seen.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't say coming soon, but I can envision it and I can see that possibility. So I'm really hopeful.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, with technology, so much is possible. So I think that is a good use of technology for the betterment of our community. And I do encourage all the like listeners or viewers of this recording to get onto the global community platform if they are able to do so. Because I did put a post up there recently, but nobody chimed in. So I'd love to hear if somebody would love to chime in.
Okay, well, I knew that you did actually. Remember that you mentioned it, and well, we've had quite the month here. We had a connection practice tour with 11 people,
You've
and
been busy. You've been
my
busy.
goodness, yeah, but in a great way, just a lot going on. But I'm gonna look at that post right
Well, I'm
after
going
we
to do
finish.
another one because I think I
Yeah, okay.
committed publicly that I would regularly engage. And to be honest, I just want to put it out there. I'm not really expecting lots of responses, but it'd be nice to see.
Sure, and that's of course what it's all about, is to get the interaction really going. So I'm excited to see that unfolding. So for you, Rachel, how do you see this practice, this intention that you have to connect? How do you see that unfolding in the coming year? In
Mhm.
2026, what will practice look like for you, and how do you see that really impacting your own leadership and your parenting even?
Yeah. Well, so this has been an area where I really, really want to make a little bit more progress on. And I have been, and I am fortunate to have now the tools and the knowledge of using this wonderful skill. I just need to put it more into practice. And for me, that doesn't mean, again, I'm not going to put an achievement framework into it to be like, I'm going to do this and this many. And right. I want to make sure that it feels right. So I'm going to check in with myself. I want to commit to checking in at least weekly, and being in touch with how I'm feeling and what I need. And then to be able to practice this more with my family and also with my students. There are opportunities to bring in elements little by little. There's a lot of conversations happening at the university level about supporting the difficult conversations, as we sort of discussed earlier. And I do think that this might be one thing we can try to insert in there. We just have to figure out, I'm always looking at what's the right opportunity, what's the right timing. And so I think we might be ready for it this year.
All right. Well, that's a great note to end on, that you're going to be ready for it this year, possibly. So, Rachel, thank you so much for being my guest and also for serving on our board and for your work with our global community. I am just so grateful for you in the connection practice, but also in the work that you're doing really out there in the world. And, they're going to be well prepared. And that's
Well,
what I hear you doing there at Minerva. And so,
thank you
yay,
so much.
young people to have more of that kind of support.
Thank you. And again, I really want to thank you for introducing me to this important skill. I do think that it is so easy to learn. And I think, again, if I set my mind to it, I will be able to practice it more. And it's again, self awareness, right? What do I need to be able to move forward on this? I can coach myself. But also, I think committing to, again, talking about this, putting it out there that I'm going to commit to it, I think will also help you move forward. So I just really, really want to thank you again for introducing me to this important skill.
Obviously, my great pleasure. All right, my friend. Well, I know we'll talk again soon. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Happy
so much.
holidays.
All right. Happy holidays. Bye bye.
Bye.